Hi, I'm Keegan. This is a bunch of gamers. This is another episode of GM Talks as we continue our series on talking about politics in games. I am joined by one.
I'm Amylin. I'm one of the co-hosts from the Werewolf Den. Some people may know me as right now one of the authors for the upcoming game of Werewolves of Vaudeville. So,
Excellent.
yeah.
So, kind of jumping right into it. What do you view as kind of like your ethos for politics and games that you run and the game that you have written for? What do you look for? What do you try and evoke?
So, my ethos in pretty much all games is that politics is in everything, no matter what you do to try to hold it back or stop it. For Werewolves in Vaudeville in particular, the politics that I am running with is the notion of no matter what you do, no matter what you go through in life, everything has two faces, and everything and how you present those two faces to your community is how you will be viewed in history.
Let's look a little deeper in that. What do you mean by that? What are the mechanics of that, and what do you mean by that? Maybe more philosophically.
So, the a Werewolves in Vaudeville system is obviously a werewolf-based game where the characters have to eat the hearts of others to survive and fuel their powers. And how this can break down is the game also has something that is called a connections mechanic, where you basically you're not just controlling your character, you're controlling an entourage of characters that all have some sort of relationship tie to your character. Or it's kind of like having your own coterie of NPCs that you run with. And so long as you are eating the right hearts of the right enemies and doing falling through and fulfilling the relationship goals that you're supposed to be fulfilling within the game, your relationships will build and these connections will get more powerful and be able to do more things for you. But if you are not lining up with them regarding what their needs are, what their relationship needs are, if you're eating the wrong people that they find dear, then that relationship starts to break down.
That kind of reminds me of, though not by any means in the sphere of radical politics, because it's a game where you're cops technically, is
Mm-hmm.
Delta Green.
Yeah.
Yeah, with the bond mechanics and things like that, and
Mm-hmm.
that you can use your bonds to kind of deflect certain stat ailments against yourself at the cost of letting maybe the relationship sort of
Suffer.
degrade or suffer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I took a lot of inspiration from Delta Green on that. I also took a lot of inspiration from New World of Dark, the new 5e edition World of Darkness touchstones when I was developing the mechanic for this. So it is much closer to a Blades in the Dark style of dice pool set. So there is that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then I guess going into that, what kind of, I know that community is a big part of it, but so how do you think community acts in a political sense, and how do you drive that to drive maybe a little bit of political thought within game groups or people who are going to hopefully pick up Werewolves of Vaudeville?
So part of that is definitely going to be driven by building, I think, packs that are very cohesive in worldview. I took a lot of inspiration from Werewolf the Apocalypse with the guiding totem spirit that people can take on for their pack. The pack totem, pack patron, I think is the term that they're using for 5th edition now. But packs can build up this sort of ongoing goal that they have with each other. They set a goal within session 0 that is driving them towards doing a very specific thing because they are packing together for that driving goal. And then after that, and it's going to be a lot of relationships that are built on old story archetypes. Right. And so you have like the mentor. And so when you build your mentor or connection, you have to understand like, okay, hey, this mentor has association with this faction and this faction, and that's going to give them this sort of bias that's going to lean into that. And so you need to figure out how that works with your driving goal for what you're trying to achieve.
Do you think there's any utility in basically teaching a skill set for people to maybe work outside of a game towards specific goals then? I don't know if that was the goal, but do you think that there's a place for that?
It's definitely something that I've always been a huge fan of, that I felt Werewolf the Apocalypse did very well, but didn't quite push it too much beyond combat. I loved the sense of like pack maneuvers and things like that. I loved that mechanic so much. And I wanted to see if I could tap in and try to bring that into other aspects of the game.
That makes sense. So what kind of political themes do you typically touch on in both the game and maybe even around your own table? And what kind of political themes do you like to explore?
For Werewolves of Vaudeville, the political themes that I am definitely planning on exploring have to do with the notion of utopia is an ongoing dream, aim that must chronically be worked for. It is a post-apocalyptic setting, but in kind of like I would like to say the best of sort of ways. Grand revolution has occurred. We've overthrown capitalism, but now we have to deal with the great costs of all of that. We have to deal with how we have these sort of city states that are now vying to fill a hierarchical vacuum. But do we want to allow that vacuum to be filled, or do we want to try to uplift and try to keep that vacuum vacant? Like, what do we do with that sort of thing? So.
Sure. No, that's fair. So that's an interesting thing, and that is a constant thing, especially in American, and I'd say even quote unquote the West's political thought, right? Because I think there's a sort of collective trauma regarding the Reign of Terror, where something was overthrown and then the power vacuum created, well, all this
something even worse.
Yeah, exactly. But that's not necessarily the case everywhere. So I'm wondering what sort of tools you would use to maybe spark the imagination to reach for something better, since I've mentioned this in other episodes of this podcast and to other people, but it does seem like that sort of cyclical nature of history and even the nihilism in vogue is kind of out at the moment. So what kind of things do you think drive hope in both your game and table?
So I feel like the best way to present that sort of thing is to not just present what the characters desire as a dream, but as something that on the small scale they are seeing working somewhere. And that's where I think like the factions will come in nicely for that, because you'll have these different religious factions that have like these certain goals, and they all have something altruistic that they want to do, but inevitably that altruism does inevitably hurt someone else. And it's always that question of like, okay, is this price worth paying? And what are the best groups that we can also bring in to build that up? Because this group, all of the factions are not working right now on large scale because everybody is isolated from each other less. Communications have broken down in a lot of sense. And so running around and creating those treks, creating those connections and building those bonds are going to be crucial for building that world that you want to see.
So kind of like a more mutual aid model. Okay, very cool. Seems like a pretty common theme with those I've spoken with so far as I get this little project underway.
I feel like everybody that is on that Discord that I found you with is kind of that similar mindset.
I have no doubts. I've done some cold calls to other creators, so we'll see if we get a little more diversity in thought. But we'll absolutely see, because I asked this last time of my other guests, and I'd like to ask you is what in your mind kind of defines radical politics, and how do you think that is reflected in games while still unfortunately being kind of commercially viable in the current system known as capitalism?
So, in my thought process, radicalism is a non-existent entity in and of itself. Nothing is actually truly radical. It just hasn't been explained in a way that is palatable to like certain frameworks, or you have been set with a disposition to be resistant to certain works of it. So the notion of a lot, particularly with a lot of left-wing politics like mutual aid and stuff like that, there is this ongoing joke that if you go into like southern rural areas, as that they talk about how it's like this will never work and stuff like that, but then if you actually go into those communities, you'll see that they're practicing it on a regular basis. They're just not calling it that. So it's kind of one of those things where the biggest thing when it comes to capitalism, bringing this down, is the notion of turning it into something where it is either a pipe dream distraction for somebody to like escape into, and just kind of pacify them that way, or it's this sort of just, how do I phrase this? It's a not my responsibility thing. It's that learned helplessness sort of idea. And so one of the better things I feel like is to give people like notions of a game where like they aren't the only ones doing it, and it isn't again like just even the core group of like the players themselves. They have that network of connections. They have to ally themselves with factions. They need to work with other people in order to achieve what they want to achieve. And when you give them the tools that allow them to see like, oh, this is how you do that step by step, and how you do it in a way that doesn't just like center you in what you want to do, then it becomes much more reliable. At least I try to bring as much as I've witnessed when I do activism like work, when I go to protests, when I go to warming centers or anything like that. I try to incorporate what I see, the attitudes that I see people do, and try to break that down as much as I can to like archetypes and narratives that people can people are used to and can understand.
No, that makes sense. And do you think this is something I've been thinking of and maybe messing around with and struggling with maybe is the idea of how do you balance giving players a sense of narrative catharsis while still maybe leaving space for your players themselves to maybe look for avenues to do some sort of radical politic outside of the game, especially if you've started to bring them on the journey. Like with my werewolf game, I have certainly seen certain players become more radicalized in their views as the game has progressed over these 7-8 years.
I know that when I was younger and running werewolf games, I did that a lot with the old trick of I'll give you XP. Hey, there's this like thing that requires volunteers going on or something like that. I'll give you XP if you show up, sort of thing. I did that a lot when I was younger. This isn't necessarily something, though, that you can really build into a game with doing something like that other than offering it as a suggestion. But one of the things that I made sure to do was I made sure to build in religious groups, and religious groups with some baggage and some nasty history, because a lot of people I have experienced are very resistant to participating in mutual aid groups because the only ones that are available in the community are run through churches. and they don't want to have that association. It gives them the ick. And it's one of those things where I've feel like if I introduce it in that, give them that understanding of like, you either need to build it yourself then, or you need to be willing to understand that like the institution is not the people on the ground level. The people on the ground level running that mutual aid for a church are not going to be the same thing as the bishops that abuse people at the higher key positions. And so you need to be willing to set aside like nasty institutional affiliations to achieve the grander goal of like community progress in order to get what you want. And so I made sure to have some like religious institutions in there that have some nasty history with them in order to try to like instill that idea.
No, that makes sense, because, yeah, the churches have been institutional in pushing things like civil rights and things like that here in the States. And, yeah, as America becomes less religious, that probably has added to the loneliness epidemic. And thus that loneliness epidemic leads to isolation, thus leads to less political action.
Being willing to work with somebody, even despite knowing that you have associations with like darker, like less savory past, is going to be something that I think a lot of people do have a hard time doing. And by also then making the thing that you are doing as the character, you are literally a monster that goes around eating the hearts of your enemies, that level of like farcical, it kind of gives you that disconnect that allows you to participate and do the super cathartic monstrous thing. You can go and take your your analogy of a pet billionaire that you want to like wish would go away, and eat that heart and make that person go away. But then when you come down and are like seeing like all of his children that are left over or things like that, and the complicated relationships they had with him and then they're the ones that are going to inherit all of the wealth and corruption he had, and learning to work with them and help them learn like what the mistakes he made were and guide them into using those resources to build a better world.
So it's trying to capture in a way the thing of like Werewolf the Apocalypse maybe of violence is one of the answers that has to be considered, but it cannot be the only answer to be considered.
Yeah. Werewolf has been super key in a lot of my influences, and it can't cover everything, and so it's one of those things where it's like, okay, let's try to fill some of those gaps, especially if you're like me and not a fan of what they did with W5. So
yes, no, I think most people listening know my views of W5, as that is still my number one viewed video.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the joys of the internet is like, do you got an opinion about, you got a negative opinion? Oh, people are happy to listen to that.
Oh, yeah. Now, I try and be very nuanced in my negative opinions.
Yeah,
but
I think most people do, but inevitably, like, particularly if you're not participating in the conversation actively, like,
sure,
it's much easier to flatten.
Oh, for sure. And a part of it, though, too, is like, I said my piece about W5, and now I try not to get involved in the conversation anymore, because it's just like, why dwell on something I don't enjoy, will not enjoy, am never going to really enjoy, so...
No, exactly. It's part of the reason why Ryan and I don't run the Werewolf Den anymore, because that was so centered on Werewolf the Apocalypse, and we knew that any new episode we put out after that was going to be like, what about W5? Tell us about W5. And it's like, I don't want to talk about something that I don't like. And
I wanted to talk about it in terms of the messaging, what it was saying thematically by accident.
Yeah.
And maybe even on purpose in places, how it mistreated employees and things like that. But that's a different conversation, I think, than It's a game I don't like.
Yeah.
It is that too, but
Hmm.
but there's no point in dwelling on that. It's the same
Hmm.
reason the only piece of content I put out that I'm not a fan of that I've created like genuinely is my Heart of the Forest, or not Heart of the Forest, what is it, Earthblood, my Earthblood
Uh,
review.
yeah.
That was
Yeah.
more ranty and less
Oh,
constructive.
yeah. I was about to say Heart of the Forest. I thought that one was received very well. Earthblood, I understand a little bit more
Yes,
though.
Earthblood was a bit ranty,
Hmm.
but yes, but no, and it's interesting because yeah, like with my werewolf game, it's still 20th. It's still getting
Hmm.
released slowly but
Yeah.
surely, week after week, and I've had to do a lot of legwork to make it fit more of a modern politic to kind of
Hmm.
get across some of the ideas. But you said that you did some activism work. I was just curious, what kind of work have you done in the past or are doing right now?
I was most recently involved in a lot of activism work with setting up new pride organizations within for my local library, trying to get a trans clothing closet set up. Before that, I was doing a lot of stuff where, have you heard? I'm not certain if you're familiar too much with the situation regarding Midwestern prairie desolation. There was recently a small patch of prairie that was kind of like one of the last untouched, pristine prairies in the state that recently the land got sold. Well, not recently, a few years ago, the land got sold because the local airport wanted to expand its tarmac. And there is an endangered type of bee that I'm trying to do my best to not dox myself with this because a lot of my stuff is super localized, and unfortunately, I have had to deal
Completely
with
understand, but
people
yeah,
trying to where I am. But
yeah. Please, please, no
yeah,
doxing on.
yeah. So I'm trying to do my best to not dox myself. But yeah, there was a whole situation where, um, and this one's still ongoing, but it does look like we're kind of losing this particular fight, where it does look like it's going to get paved over. Their compromise is going to be that they're going to take some of the native some seeds from the native plant life and donate it into seed banks and try to spread it into other prairies that are getting restored and things like that. But this was the last one in this particular state of this type that had not been like touched by any sort of industry. And it's really sad that it's going away.
Yeah. So then maybe less doxable
Yeah.
information is how do you think what do you think is good advice for maybe people listening who want to try and get into that kind of activism to not get discouraged if they lose a particular fight to dust themselves off and try something else?
Uh, Everything is intersectional. Everything works with another thing. Part of the reason why our campaign of the prairie did fall apart was because we weren't able to. There were too many people, I feel at least within the group, who were not willing to like reach out and work with different other activist groups within the area and help and make sure that we get like people that were willing to come out and protest to go out and like protest for their things. But the big thing is when you do find groups that are like is that no matter what, the people who are willing to keep on fighting, they're going to pick up and they're going even when they lose the fight, they're going to pick up and they're going to find somewhere else to go. They're going to find more fight. There's always going to be a new fight to fight, and that almost energizes them because they know that they will always be needed. And when you have people, and when you know that there are people like that, it's much easier to kind of not lose hope because you can draw from that sort of strength. And you can draw from the fact that like, those people will always be there for you when you need them, and kind of care, and that builds up that well of like, I want to be there. I want to go out there and make sure that I do not give up, because eventually when that person takes the knee, I want to be able to like be there for them as well.
Yeah, that makes excuse me, that makes sense. So, because you've been in the gaming space and the activism space, have you ever done, or have you any advice for listeners on how they could maybe try and use their games as, baby's first taste of either activism or mutual aid, just getting the foundational steps to inspire them to keep going? I know you talked about experience when you were younger, but maybe, like for my example is that I drew quite a bit from the new sprinkled in twisted versions of it in Werewolf, and went, actually, this basically does exist, and then drop it there and do things like that.
Yeah, Werewolf is great for just like it. This is just this thing with a different name sort of thing. Werewolf is great for that. The big things that I find are most effective are honestly doing things that make the players feel more like they are doing things as a cohesive whole, as opposed to just a bunch of random individuals thrown together. Because when they feel like they are a cohesive whole, all and like making these these decisions together, that means that the person who like really wants to like step up and do something, but they're not great with their confidence, they don't feel like they can do things like that, at uplifting those like people that don't feel confident to step up straight away in the game, gives them that confidence to step up and do things like that when you uplift them in your game. And I feel like that is probably the best tool that I've come across. I've had players who absolutely like have I work a lot with people that have like anxiety disorders with a lot of my games, and so many of them were able to take what the environment that I provided within the game, unleash all of the catharsis that they were worried that they were going to unleash in my game setting, in a place where they can feel safe and unjudged, and then take that and go into the real world and then be like, okay. And then what they would do is they would come back to me and be like, I did this and I did this and I did this, and now I'm really frustrated by this, and can you do something about that? And I'd be like, absolutely, we're going to take this thing that frustrates you, I'm going to blow it up 100 times, and then I'm going to let you choke and like rip it to pieces, and then you're going to feel better about that, and that's going to give you the stamina to then go back and deal with it on a much smaller scale, at least what it feels like emotionally.
Very cool. I like that. Besides your own game and, of course, Werewolf the Apocalypse, are there any other games that you would highly recommend for exploring political themes, or doing the same sort of inspiration for activism?
I would say pretty much any game that doesn't center straight white cis men is going to be a good go-to for that. Wise Women was one that I came across. It's a really small game that was about witches in Poland, and it's all about just the herbs that they put together and the magic that they need to conjure. Any game that does not center what our modern culture considers a default standpoint, whether it's a white person, a straight person, a cis person, or anything like that, is, I think, going to be really great for that. Because when you get into those games where those people don't feel centered or in any way, people then come out of that feeling more confident to then say and do the same things that they were willing to say and do in your game.
That's a good advice.
I try to seek out more indie games, mostly in part because, like, Like when you're trying to break into like with writing your own game, those are the people that are going to have the most novel ideas. Those are the people that are going to have the interesting perspectives. And it's good to listen to those folks because, yeah, we're best case scenario with mainstream games I've found is you're going to get a new perspective, but it's going to be watered down for the sake of a shareholder. So,
oh, for sure. Like, there's a reason I don't do a lot of 5e, just because I think it's an okay game at the best of times.
Absolutely has its strengths, but like it's not my go-to for anything.
Sure, I do find it interesting because I do like a lot of OSR games, and OSR is either like super hardcore mutual aid, like anarchists, or the most right-wing of the right-wing people you can find on God's green earth sort of situation.
Yeah.
And
I think that really sums it up right there.
Yes, and like with Dungeon Crawl Classics, it has this whole earlier printings. They have this whole thing of like you'll respect the original creators of Gygax, Arneson, and they go through, and most of them are white and male. And then like in their latest printing, they went fantasy is diverse and it has multiple authors, and they give Gygax kind of, and then they go through, you know, they give a couple examples of people of color, and some people are like, cool, nice change up, and then some people lost their fucking minds just completely and utterly, and it's like, what's this go woke go broke bullshit? I'm like, you know, like one of the mainline characters that they constantly draw in their books is black, right? Like,
yeah.
And they did have a slip up because they tried to do a Goodman Games or Indie Game Creator Con, and Goodman Games tried to do that, and they published like their speakers, and they had some women, they had some non-binary and queer people, but
was it con where it just resulted in a lot of people getting doxxed because of that or something?
I don't think so. No, the problem is when they promoted it, they chose some of the more popular ones, and the more popular ones just happen to be very white and very male. So it's like, hey, check out our diversity of thought, and it's just like, oh, that's a bad fucking look, guys.
Okay.
Yeah. No, I don't know. I'm not aware of any con that where a bunch of people got doxxed, but I haven't kept up too much on the convention scene.
I do want to say it was like in 2017 there was a big old outcry for that. So there was a con that had just a panel of nothing but women of color on it or something like that, and it resulted in like death threats being sent to all of the panelists' homes, and it was really tea. But that's it's one of those sad things.
Yeah,
I wish I remembered all the details, but
yeah, I have an interesting book. It's called I think it's like Izrakin's or Izrakai's Guide to the West Marches. And it's a West Marches like campaign idea book with tips and tricks on how to run a West Marches game for 5e with some OSR stuff in the back for people who don't want to do 5e. Yeah. And a big thing though is it has a whole section about like, hey, this D&D is kind of rooted in colonialism, and it gets more stark and obvious with a West Marches style game. So here are some suggestions on how to make that not the case. And I posted that like excerpt on the Facebook page for this channel, and some dude like was like, evil races are there to make life easier for GMs. If you make people overthink things, they won't run games. And it's like, I don't think that's true.
I've hit the point where sadly I can just be like, no, that's what right-wing political party analogies are for.
Yeah, right.
That usually just sends them off on a tirade that gets them on their own.
No, that's fair. That's fair. Yeah, no, it's because it is interesting to read games and kind of get some of the politic behind them. I'll be running Our Beautiful Ruin for Gen Con this year, and it's an interesting game. It's a horror game. It's kind of Edwardian style alternate fantasy world, but basically all governments have collapse, but they're still aristocrats who are held up by sheer inertia, because even though all the governments fell, there's a cultural inertia where even if nothing, there are no institutions really to keep this going beyond guilds and like, aristocratic houses or families. They can't really enforce it. No one has standing armies anymore.
I think this game on TikTok, I want to say. I heard it. I think I heard of it being promoted there.
That makes sense, yeah.
Oh, wait, what did you say it was called?
Our Beautiful Ruin?
Yeah. I think I heard about that being promoted on TikTok. It sounded really good. I'll have to look into that one.
Yeah, it's very intended to be melodramatic, but like, not as a like a disparity against it, but it's there to have rules where you can like force big melodramatic moments that players can like ham things up, and it's built in to let people have their shining moments and things like that.
Farce is an amazing tool, I feel like. Even like games that like to take themselves like way too seriously, like old school Call of Cthulhu. Like, you can still read the farce into it.
Oh, for sure. It's actually interesting, kind of the weirdness that comes out of this, kind of like attempting to universalize RPGs. Because I don't know if you've ever looked at the G.I. Joe game. Because I have. And it's like, so G.I. Joe is no longer the American hero. They're global heroes created by the UN to enforce human rights. So like, that kind of sounds worse when you think about it for more than like 2 minutes. But okay.
We're just over here stating American imperialism on steroids here.
but by accident, yeah. And but other things are interesting in the writing too, because they're like, hey, the big top guys of Cobra, they're bad. But the average soldier of Cobra are actually people who have been cast aside by the system, given a lie of their exceptionalism, and recruited in for a way to have a sense of belonging and to take back power back from their abandonment. So keep that in mind. And I was like, interesting. So it's trying to have its cake and eat it too in some ways. Or it might just be perspectives of authors trying to do the best with the material they're given. But I find that one, at least from what it is trying to say politically, just incredibly interesting.
Interesting. I might have to check that one out.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same. It's the Essence 20 system, and it's the same system for all the Hasbro games. So there's a Power Rangers, a My Little Pony, and a Transformers game as well.
Yeah, I've had some friends have run the My Little Ponies one for me.
Yeah, exact same system. The My Little Pony one dumbs down a couple rules, but they're all compatible. And so last Gen Con, I ran a game where it was each splat, and then one person from each group came together for a crossover at the end.
Hasbro mix nuts, I love it.
It was insane. I can't remember who it was. It was like Heavy Arms or something like that from fucking G.I. Joe pop up in the My Little Pony world and showed them what a gun does to a tree. And he's like, I would like you to put that away, please. Like, no, thank you. And because no kid made it to the second round, thankfully. So it was all adults. So I could really play with some slightly darker things. So I had it so like the person from Power Rangers and the person from My Little Pony don't understand the concept of death as we do. So the Transformer and the G.I. Joe had to explain the concept of death after shooting up a Cobra agent to those two characters, and it was incredibly funny. Just like the Power Ranger, why is milkshake leaking out of that guy? And it's like, is he okay? Is he a friend? And it's like, oh, buddy. So that was pretty fun.
That reminds me of a dare that I did where somebody gave me all of the like cutesiest little kids games that they possibly could. And they had told me I had to make it as edgy as possible while still being kid safe.
Oh.
And I ended up taking, I think it was this game, it was called like Magical Kittens Save the Day or something.
Oh my god. Okay. Okay.
And so we ended up having this whole thing where like one of the players like literally like the game is you make a kitten but you also make a human that's your owner, and one of the players like their whole goal was just throw me off throughout this whole thing, and one of the players is like, yeah, my owner is Jason Voorhees.
Oh, Jesus. That's
And so,
fantastic.
but I still make this as like friendly, kid friendly as possible. So I'm like, I, we're going to teach Jason how to properly swim today.
Oh, jeez. Oh man, that's good. I wrote something for Pugmire for the Canis Minor vault, and I got one review on it I found online, and man, the person's like, I think I got 7 out of 10 stars or something like that, and they're just like, hey, so this book is real fucking dark about a game about dog people, and they're just like, these guys are basically dog supremacists, and because it's an antagonist book, and it's like some of their tactics are straight out of the handbook of the clan. So there's always been a question that's plagued Pugmire: is this a game for kids, and is it a funny game? Well, with this book, it can be neither at your table. And it's like, wow, fantastic. Thank you, sir. I accidentally misread it as, is this a game for kids, and is it fun? Well, with this book, it can be neither. And I was like, ooh, harsh but fair, I guess. But yeah, it is. It's like, I think it's like $1 or something like that, maybe $5. Like it's on Drive Through RPG. But yeah, it was released right at the first Trump presidency, and I had some real thoughts that came leaking out in
yeah, I can imagine.
In Pugmire, where it was like, yeah, these dogs wear blue. It's different than the police dog blue, but they want to look blue, so dogs look to them for safety and security, especially when they start coming after rats and cats. And it's just like, ooh, man, like some of the things I put in there, I was like, that is definitely not meant for children, and it might have been a bit risque to just put out there, but I made it sure that people knew that they were evil in no uncertain terms. Like, I don't think you can look at that book and go, oh, I could play a back alley retriever and be the good guy. So thankfully did that. But yeah, that was a fun little review, and having some politic bleed into games.
Oh, that is delightful. I will definitely have to check out your little book on there.
Oh, thank you. It's like, I believe the full title is Bad Dog, the Back Alley Retrievers.
Bad Dog. Awesome. I will definitely have to check that out.
Yeah, like I try and lighten it with a little bit of puns or like alliterative names, but it was probably not enough, in hindsight.
Yeah.
Oh, goodness. Well, it's like my current werewolf game. There are moments of levity, but I throw out some dark stuff where we talk post game for people who listen to this podcast and the other one, which not as much crossover as I'd like, but I understand. As someone reviewed the werewolf game, it's technically longer than the audiobook of the Bible. So it's a lot of content. We have cooldowns where it's like, all right, that was pretty intense. This person tried to, unalive themselves, and we talk them down. Do we need to have a break? Oh no, my favorite NPC died of cancer. Do we need to talk this out? And it's like, yeah, maybe a little bit. So getting on in time. So I was just wondering, do you have any kind of closing thoughts on like politics and games? Thoughts about things you want to pitch about your own game?
I will be moving to start more publicly promoting it, hopefully within the next couple of months. We're in our kind of final stages for alpha testing the system. And I'm kind of starting to like take all of the desperate 20 some odd documents and merge them all into a single document. So we'll be looking for like backers and GMs, and if you want to be in a game that is heavily influenced by splatterpunk, Werewolf the Apocalypse, but is sounds like it's done. It sounds like it reads in the voice of the gaudiest of drag queens. I am more than happy to have you come and check out the game.
Excellent. Thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it and getting your thoughts and some of your advice. Yeah, absolutely. And so, is there any place that you want to be found online, or your project can be found online for the folks to know about?
I will be making an official announcement and dropping official art on the Werewolf Den. Hopefully by April, you can find the YouTube channel for that on YouTube at the Werewolf Den. You can also find the art being dropped on Ko-fi at the Werewolf Den when that officially releases.
Excellent. Well, and with that, I'm Keegan. This was A Bunch of Gamers. You can find us on YouTube, Podbean, Spotify, and most other podcast places. I'm on Facebook and Blue Sky now, but I was never on Twitter, and now will never be, as it is a cesspool, and I was always proven right. Bye.